Helena, how are you? Welcome back to Forked, where we're going to talk all about the food and all about the politics, and sometimes both at the same time. How's it going?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good. Why don't we jump right in? So, the first thing we like to start off with every time on Forked is something that we call the double take. And that is something, I'm just going to move my mic a little closer to my mouth so that my sound designer does not get mad at me.
We don't want that.
Excuse me.
No.
No, we don't want that. So, we start off with the double take, and that is something in the food and political world that just kind of makes you do a double take because it's so shocking or unusual or usually not so great. And the one that I think we should start off with is the announcement is a little while ago now by Brooke Rollins, the head of the USDA, where she said that the USDA would make the largest single investment in US history to the Patrick Leahy Farm to School Grant Program, $18 million for fiscal year 2026. Woohoo, that's a good thing. Only problem was that back in June, they cut $10 million from the same program. So, Helena, tell me what's going on here. What should we make about
I was
this?
going to
Make
say,
of
we're
this.
not counting the $1 billion that was canceled
No, no,
last
no. We're
year.
not talking about. We're not counting. We're
Yeah.
just talking about 18 million coming in after 10 million went out.
Yeah. So look, I think if you take a step back, it's kind of surprising that we haven't seen more investment earlier because this stuff is so popular and so bipartisan. Like
Yeah.
farm to school is a home run across the board. Small towns, urban areas. I mean, it just doesn't matter. Like it's popular. And so watching Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins take so much heat after canceling $1 billion in local food funding that was specifically earmarked for food banks and schools, one of the early moves of the administration. I remember I was watching her. I don't remember where she was, and she said she was getting asked about that everywhere she went. Right,
Yeah.
so there was political heat and a lot of negative headlines, and this obviously raises a lot of questions about MAHA. Like this seems anti-MAHA. This flies in the face of MAHA. They want more local food, more whole food. So seeing some investment, a stepped up investment in this specific farm to school program makes a lot of sense politically. I think policy wise, most people agree that it's something that makes sense. But again, it always comes in this contradiction of like, are they really ending up ahead? Do they have more money? And everyone's still really upset about that $1 billion.
I think before we even net out whether or not we're ahead or behind on the investments and the rescissions, I think we should look a little bit about what they're actually doing. Now, some of this seems to be fairly necessary reform, a simplification of the process to get these these grants made and get food to kids. But it does certain things, right? I mean, one of the biggest things it seems to me is that it rewards size, right? It makes the minimum level of the grants something like $50,000, I believe. The example I saw in Civil Eats, they talk about how it used to be in 2022. There was this rural South Dakota school district. They have just 300 kids, and they get $23,000 to develop partnerships with local farms that allows them to get meals brought to school and field trips to teach kids about farming. You can't do that under the way the now streamlined, more efficient process is concerned. And the other thing that it seemed to do, by and large, is remove any whiff of DEI as it relates to these programs. So again, how do we think about this? Is this better? Certainly, in some ways, it's not better. Should it be for bigger grants? What do you think of it?
Well, I'm not sure about the details and how they really net out and whether or
Yeah.
not it's better or not. Um, I think the the question of like how big the grants should be, that really comes down to how the farm to school operators are actually using the program, and like hopefully USDA is getting feedback on that.
Yeah.
I don't know how much they're receptive to the feedback, if it's coming from groups that they deem are more progressive. Like I just don't know, and so I would really hope that we could get to a place where farm to school goes back to being this like nonpartisan, bipartisan, like
But
a
that's not going to
movement.
happen. We're
A
not
movement.
anywhere near that. And I think that's actually, thank you for saying that, a pretty good transition to what is most likely, not most likely, what is the largest domestic thing happening in the news as we're doing this taping. And that is the killing of Charlie Kirk, the assassination of Charlie Kirk.
Yeah.
So maybe you can walk me through a little bit of how he is connected to the things that we talk about on this show, which is food and politics, the MAHA movement.
Yeah, I think maybe not a lot of listeners will know that Charlie Kirk played a really pivotal role in the MAGA MAHA alliance. So that, that fateful alliance from about a year ago between Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and President Trump, when right before the campaign or the election, and a lot of folks within Trump's orbit think that this alliance really helped Trump win. Okay, so this is a crucial political alliance, but Charlie Kirk was very supportive of this alliance. He was very supportive of MAHA from the get go. He also, I think, was pretty supportive of RFK Jr. Like he'd had him on his podcast. And I've watched Charlie Kirk's podcast quite a bit in the last year because he would have MAHA figures on and sort of, talk to them about what their agenda is and all that. And I just watched Robert F. Kennedy Jr. actually appeared at, there was a Charlie Kirk memorial at the Kennedy Center recently, and he spoke, and he actually described Kirk as, quote, the primary architect of my unification with President Trump. So really played a pivotal role there. I personally just disagreed with Charlie Kirk on a lot
Yeah.
of things, particularly civil rights issues, um, primarily things like that, right? I would just go on the record with that. But watching all of this unfold, I mean, there's just no other word than horrifying. I mean, it's a real gut check for America. Like, where are we in this moment where violence is so common across the board? And I'm watching a lot of reckoning happening, and of course there is a Maha angle in all of this as well.
All right. Well, I just didn't want to let this go unremarked upon. I agree with you. Political violence is a terrible thing. I don't feel like I don't feel that I'm obligated to have an opinion on the death of Charlie Kirk. That's not necessarily. I think I'm a little far away from that issue to say specifically. Other than I
Like,
don't
we
think
don't want anyone to die or be murdered on
I don't
like.
want anybody getting killed, but like I see in my, my social media circles, my political
Mhm.
circles, my family group chat, which God only knows what's going on there right now. There's good stuff in the family group chat, but that's what I have a family group chat for, to share my opinions about the death of Charlie Kirk. I think for us, we can look at him in the Maha context and leave the broader, potential looming civil war stuff to the people who are focusing on that subject. But I
Sure hope not.
do,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not looking for a civil war either.
I don't think that's civil war as well. I'll be clear about that. But yeah, I look, I think there's a real anytime something big like this happens, there should be a lot of national reflection. And so I
Yeah.
hope that's where we're headed.
That again, I doubt it, but let's leave it at that, I guess. So our next segment for the show is forks and knives, and it is the main dish, the thing that's happened in the United States in food and politics right now. And I think that's a fairly obvious thing, even though it's a little bit after the fact now. But it's the release of the MAHA Commission's strategy document. And Helena, I'll ask you to talk a little bit about it, but really I want you to talk about it in the context of a question I have, which is, did RFK Jr. and the MAHA Commission roll over to big food and ag like, say, I don't know, a bear cub, maybe?
Well, I think the Maha strategy certainly rolled over to big ag. Like there's just so much evidence of that. I mean, I there's just no way to argue that the Maha reports strategy is in line with particularly
No.
RFK Jr.'s rhetoric on agriculture, specifically his alarm over pesticides and how concerned we all should be. This is what he's been arguing on the campaign trail and also as HHS secretary. And
Well,
the
let's just stop there
tone
for a
different on
second for
pesticides. Yeah.
people who aren't completely following this. It almost does not
Yeah.
mention pesticides,
It
period. Right?
completely folds on the entire concept of any need for a crackdown on pesticides. I mean, agriculture groups praised this document. My inbox was full of farm and different commodity groups praising this, praising the commission for listening to the industry, for letting them have a seat at the table. I mean, it was really across the board positive. Interestingly, I think the question is a little more nuanced when you look at big food.
Okay.
So, no food companies and no food trade groups were in my inbox actively praising this document.
But it was a
I
similar thing. Again, like when you look at what's not in the
similar,
document,
it's a little bit
one mention of the word sugar, nothing they no
no
mention of the
measure
word high fructose corn
yeah.
syrup, a lot of things that were already part of the dietary guidelines, which is like, hey, don't eat so much sugar. It's not so good for you. It's about at that level. So why should they not be
So
feeling as happy as the corn growers and soybean growers of the world?
because on the ag stuff, it, like, completely avoids any of the controversial issues. On the food stuff, I would say that it doesn't call for, like, a big crackdown on the food industry, so that's where they win, right? But there's still a lot that the food companies hate, and I think what I'm really seeing is the difference in political power. Like, the agriculture industry totally won this wrestling match. They were like, "Get us out of the MAHA, like, sites," right? And they were like, "Get us out," right? And they mainly, like, get out of this. The food stuff, though, is a little bit more nuanced. There are a few things in here that food companies really hate. So there's not like some I mean, I think the biggest criticism of the MAHA report is it doesn't have a lot of regulatory teeth, right? Like, it uses the term deregulation more. So in
Absolutely. It is a
general
deregulatory document. We're going to talk about this little later on. We talk about some of the good vibes that are in this document, but it is at its heart a very, very serious deregulatory document.
yes. Although there's a couple of exceptions in here that I think are interesting to point out. So it does say that they might do front of pack labeling, which would be regulatory. I do think
That's true.
this is an important like caveat. We don't know that they're going to do this for
But
sure.
I might do a lot of things. There are a lot of things I might do. I
So
might get up and walk away from this microphone while we're doing the podcast, but I probably won't, right?
so there's a lot of like language like might explore or will explore
That's right.
potentially, right? So there's that kind of language and I think it's really important to be, honest about that language, right? That there's a lot of wiggle room to get out of this stuff. But I am hearing top officials mention front of pack labeling more. I think the chances that they are going to do something on that are increasing. So we'll see. That would be a regulatory thing that
Yeah.
the FDA could do. That could be a real thing.
And a good thing and a useful thing. That
A
would be a
lot of
good
a lot of the nutrition folks think that would be a good thing done right. Like a lot of other countries are doing front of pack labeling to try to encourage changes in consumption. So that's a potential, okay, but with a lot of mealy mouthed language. Okay, there's also one thing I think was surprising is they they had a line in there about marketing to kids,
yeah.
and it was that was surprising, but again, it was very mealy mouthed. So I'm actually going to read what it said. It said guidelines to limit direct marketing of certain foods to children. HHS and FTC, along with other relevant agencies, will explore the development of potential guidelines to limit the marketing of certain unhealthy foods to children. So the fact that it was in there at all, I think is like, oh, wow, that's kind of surprising. This is a third rail issue for the food industry. But again, it does not say we will do this. It does not say
I think we have to hold politicians to certain kind of, and regulatory makers to certain kinds of standards. That is, and this is a technical term here, bupkis, right? Like they may do all this stuff, but that does not
that does
obligate them
not
to do
no, well,
anything.
yeah, none of
It's
these reports obligate them
nothing,
to do anything.
nothing.
We'll see. Like if they did that, that would be a big thing.
Yeah,
We are not surprised by they did talk about grass are generally recognized as safe reform. That is one thing the industry or the FDA has committed to doing. But again, we haven't seen a proposal yet. We are a long way from that being done. And one thing that I'm noticing is that a lot of these Trump officials are talking about grass reform or food additive reform as if it has already happened. It has
right.
not happened. They have not proposed it yet. That will be a significant change if they do it. So that we got to watch and actually hold their actions. We got to watch their actions, not just what they say. It totally whiffs on pesticides. It barely mentions sugar. It mentions it once, does not mention seed oils. There's so many things in here that MAHA was so worked up about and is so worked up about that are completely avoided in this report. So
So
the
yeah,
rhetoric does not match this report
absolutely
in any
not.
way, shape, or form.
So I want to pass on from some of the details from the report and talk about some of the politics surrounding. But before we do that, there are some strange things in there, or maybe they're not so strange. Maybe they make sense for RFK Jr. and where this movement is going. There are definitely things in there about fluoride. We're going to be
Mhm.
looking at fluorides hard. We're going to also, there was a section, a very short section on repurposed drugs. right? So
Yeah.
is this opening the flood? I mean, the floodgates to Ozempic, which is a repurposed drug. It's a diabetes drug that's used for weight loss. Is it that they're getting at, or is it that we're talking ivermectin for all? What does this
I
mean?
have no idea about that.
Yeah,
I'm gonna be frank. I have no idea.
yeah,
There's a lot of other things in here about, trying to reorient NIH research
yep,
to be more looking at root causes. And I think all of those things again are like words until they are actually enacted. Is there going to be funding? That is the big question. You can just say all of these things and it just does not matter unless you're actually putting your money where your mouth is. And so some of this is like, okay, I mean, you're saying this, but we need to see, are they actually investing in nutrition research? Are they actually? And so we don't know yet. And I think
yeah.
it's important to separate those things. Um, yeah, I mean, there's also some stuff in here around,
Synthetic opioids,
yeah,
electromagnetic radiation.
which I know nothing about. Yeah. It's like, and I think like all consumers are like, yeah, we should be studying things like microplastics and any type of, uh, outside force, technology, chemical, if it can harm us, we should be studying those things. I think like most reasonable people agree about that, but
But
the
it
proof
doesn't
will
seem
be
like
in
a
the
heavy
pudding.
priority, right? There's more on fluoride in this document than there are on microplastics. And that, frankly, I mean, I'm no scientist. I don't want to set myself up as a scientist, but I worry more about microplastics than I do about fluoride.
Yeah. The fluoride debate is a little bit more nuanced, I think, than folks maybe you can read about. There is a little bit of changing science on fluoride. Not that we need to yank it out of
Yeah.
water systems. Like we know that it reduces cavities, but there is I think, a science-based nuance discussion to have on that.
Yeah.
But what's happening is there's like a moral panic about it, and states
Right.
are just like ripping it out of the water without maybe considering the broader consequences. And so it's become a social issue, which I think,
Well, isn't it a question of
over.
pride of place? Like, I mean, this document is supposed to take on the big priorities in the United States as it relates to the food system, and fluoride takes up a fair amount of oxygen in there. That that
Yeah,
that
but I guess
that's the problem, right?
it's like a red meat political issue now,
Yeah.
whereas, like, microplastics are really hard because I think if you ask, the average consumer, you're like, "Oh, we're finding microplastics in, placentas and our blood and our brains and everything, like, is that should we be concerned about that?" People would be like, "Yeah," but to meaningfully take on microplastics, you have to take on, the plastic industry, food packaging,
And it's in everything.
clothing.
It's a very, very difficult problem to
It's a
solve.
really difficult
Yeah.
problem, and it involves taking on, like, basically capitalism. I mean,
I
really, that's what it involves. So there's certain things like that where you're like, "Oh, well, I see why you whiffed on this," right? Because
yeah,
it's really hard.
yeah.
And, I do think it's important to note that it's not like the Biden administration was taking on,
No, I think
the
that's
plastic
fair. I
industry
just think
either.
that it's
Like, yeah.
it's just the question of the priorities when you read the document and it's only 20 pages long.
Mhm.
There's some weird stuff happening there. But all right, so I want to pass on from the 128 recommendations there. I mean, by the way, I just love the way that HHS describes it. There's the 128 recommendations in this document, which are unprecedented, historic, super duper. Oh my God, they're so great. It's just an amazing document tonally, right? It's not what you think what you're going to get out of it is by no means a staid policy document. It is very much a political document.
Yeah, and I think folks need to go back and read other similar documents, like, back during the Obama administration, they released a lengthy, like, strategy against childhood obesity. Like, this stuff, yeah, I've read other documents. This is pretty light. Like, this is 20 pages.
It's a primer.
Yeah, it's pretty high level. And, like, I think, you could argue there's some benefits to keeping it high level. There's less specific promises to hold them to. I also think there's a lot of fighting over this document, and so,
And
yeah.
more fighting to come. I want to talk about sort of the political reaction to it within the world of MAHA. And I think there are two sort of interesting reactions, public reactions that are worth talking about. I'd like to get you to respond to it. I mean, one is from, and I just love these names. I mean, it's, it's Vani Hara. She is known as the food babe. And she says that the strategy document is declaring war on ultra processed foods, right? Which seems a pretty hard case to press, but free country, you
They
can say
do
whatever you like.
commit to defining ultra-processed
Right.
foods. That is committed.
Defining, but it's not declaring war, not exactly. And then there is from Zoe Honeycutt from Moms
Zen
Across
honeycomb.
America.
Yeah.
Excuse me. I'm sorry, Zen Honeycutt, and she is the executive director of Moms Across America. It's a grassroots advocacy group that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is on the board of on its board of advisors, and she calls this document blatant pandering to the pesticide companies. So, I mean, I think if you're in the sort of liberalish, centrish media, wherever you and I may be, in what sort of way, there's always this idea that now's the time where they're really going to turn on each other. They're going to go after each other. The thing has been broken open and now it's open warfare within whatever group on the right people are upset about. I don't think that's going to happen, but I'm curious what it means to have this level of disagreement among people who are pushing this movement whose politics are not quite understood that well yet.
Well, a lot of these groups were pretty clear. A lot of the advocates within MAHA, if they work on pesticide issues, they were like, these are agrochemical industry talking points. I mean, they were pretty clear on that because not only does this document not call for a crackdown on pesticide regulation, it
Yeah.
actually suggests that agencies need to embark on an initiative to make sure we all understand how well our current regulatory
Yes.
system is working,
The
which
language
is
the
not
language on it is amazing. I mean,
which is
it's just
not the
yeah,
stance in any way, shape, or form of MAHA. They not only are deeply alarmed about pesticides on the market, especially ones that may be banned in other places, but they want these pesticides out, like banned, right?
yeah,
And so this is not some line you can walk between these, right? And I think that the strategy chooses the industry side, that's just kind of a fact. So they're open in their criticism. What's interesting though is they don't blame Kennedy. They don't, even though he's the chair of this MAHA Commission.
yeah.
Obviously, like this is his report that he unveiled. They unveiled it at HHS. They don't seem to blame him at all, and even Trump. It's like, oh well, the industry is just like influencing this process, or they influence the government, and there isn't a lot of heat directed at Kennedy himself. It's just interesting because I think were it someone else, you would see a lot more heat directed at that person, at like they have, you know, caved. Like there were a lot of people who thought Michelle Obama eventually became like too easy on the food industry because they did a lot of private sector partnerships.
Yeah.
Well, here you see Kennedy. Kennedy is doing these private sector commitments to get dyes out of food instead of banning them. And it's sort of amazing to watch like that be like a completely fine approach when people weren't happy that Michelle Obama did that. So
The
it's
political math
interesting.
the political math is there to be done, I'm sure, but it ain't easy. It is not algebra, it's calculus, right? To figure out what these reactions mean.
I
Um,
didn't do particularly well in calculus, so I'm not
this is a show for English majors, not math students. Yeah.
Ah,
That's
yeah.
unfortunate. So let's pass on to our final segment, which is the good vibe. And that is something within the world of food and politics that offers a particle, a shred, a maybe a PFAS sized particle of hope out there. And what I wanted to focus on, which I think is a somewhat controversial choice, is in the MAHA strategy document, they call for the return of whole milk to the school lunch programs. What do you think of that?
Oh man. So I think it's happening, first of all.
Okay.
I think whole fat dairy is going to be treated very favorably by the dietary guidelines update that we're going to see some point before the end of the year. The timeline has been very unclear on that. Is it good or is it bad? It really depends on who you ask. So there's a lot of folks within public health who are just like, this just doesn't make sense. We should be limiting saturated fat overall. The preponderance of evidence does not support this. They're also concerned about kids and calories and all those things. But there is also a lot more nuance in the scientific debate over not just saturated fat, but specifically dairy fat.
Yeah.
And whether or not we may have a, we may need a more nuanced view of that. And, particularly for things like yogurt. And it is kind of a hot mess in terms of the messaging to consumers and how we're supposed to interpret all this. Like, I'm genuinely confused on the regular, and I literally cover food policy.
I
Um,
I think it's an interesting sort of like a way to tell. It's hard to interpret what it means, certainly from a nutrition perspective. But like for example, in my family, I have 3 kids. My kids, at home, certainly we always had whole milk. I don't like the taste of 2% milk, so
yeah,
that's what we had at home. Plus, I didn't. I thought that if I was going to have my children expending their fat budget, right? I'd rather them do it on whole milk than say like junk food. So I was
yeah.
okay with it. But I understand that
And
people
that
there
may
may
be
yeah,
supported by evidence,
yeah.
actually, because yeah. So the thing that's about to happen is that the dietary guidelines are going to say saturated fat, we don't need to limit it. That's what they're going to say, probably something to that effect. And then you're going to have parts of the nutrition establishment, like in the scientific community, are going to say this is an unscientific um, recommendation, right? And they're going to attack the dietary guidelines.
Yeah.
And then we're going to have, I think we've talked about this a little bit before, we're going to have like multiple types of nutrition advice. So you're going to have like the dietary guidelines, and then you're going to have maybe Harvard or other groups saying, no, here is actually the real dietary guidelines, similar to what we're seeing actually on vaccines. Like, you don't trust the CDC schedule. Well, here's the American Academy of Pediatrics schedule.
I
And
think
that's
that's a
kind
really
of a
important point.
nightmare. Yeah.
That's a really, really important point because if you look where within them in the strategy document that this recommendation about milk comes, it's in a section called food deregulation. And it's one of the complexities of the MAHA movement itself. Because if you look at some of those proposals they're making,
Mhm.
some of them, and I say this without knowing all the details of them, but many of them sound pretty good, right? Like, there's the one thing about
Introducing technology in schools and
yeah,
there's
mobile
tons
grocery eliminating zoning restrictions so you could have mobile grocery units in food deserts and all there. I think it is very much worth looking at some of these proposals and trying to understand if they're good or bad. But they are all nestled within a deregulatory
Mhm.
framework. Which, when you talk about okay, California's got its vaccine regulations, New York's got its thing, and everybody's doing different things. To me, what it suggests is that the goal, maybe not specifically just to MAHA, but the Trump administration itself, is not really based on a particular form of government. It's on destruction of government, right? That's the real thing that's being put forward. When you look at, okay, we're going to have whole milk back in the schools, and if you like whole milk, that's good for you. But really, what you're doing is undermining the ideas that are the reason behind why we have a government in the first place, right?
Well, it's hard because school meals are a government program, right? Like,
Yeah.
so even having milk at all in schools is fundamentally a government program, right? Like,
Yeah.
I can't remember what the percentage is, but a really significant percent of the fluid milk in the whole country goes to federal school meals programs. And so,
That's where kids drink it. Like, I mean, my kids had milk in their cereal at home. We didn't have they drank my kids drank a lot of milk.
I mean,
We were
I
kids.
drank a lot of chocolate milk growing up. It was
Yeah,
most
same here. But they also definitely that's what they drank at school, right? Like they
Mhm.
just
Yeah.
that was it. It wasn't juice
Yeah.
boxes. It was
And
milk.
yeah, I think the other interesting thing about the whole milk is that, first of all, it's a bipartisan issue. Like, when it actually got voted on in the House, and it was bipartisan in terms of who supported it. I can't remember what the vote breakdown was, but it was like
Whole
overwhelming.
fat milk. Whole
Whole
fat
fat
milk.
milk, whole
Okay.
milk was actually voted on in the House. And I mean, it was remarkable. I can't remember what else was going on, but I remember thinking, like, how did this get a vote? Like, it's so hard to get a vote on anything. It shows you the power of the dairy industry and some other things. So
And kids shows the power of kids. I mean, people care about their kids.
yeah, except for, like, we haven't been updating the school meals,
Fair enough.
legislation.
Fair
We're
enough.
supposed to do every 5 years. Congress doesn't care that much, and they're not gonna spend more money, and the money thing is what really matters here, because whole milk, if you want whole milk in all the schools, you're gonna have to spend more money. It costs more money, and so one of the reasons that schools may not transition to whole milk, even if it's allowed, because
Too expensive. Yeah.
it's too
That's it.
expensive, and so if you want to fundamentally, and I say this all the time, this is just a statement of fact. If you want to fundamentally change what is served in schools, you have to spend more money. You have to actually reform whether or not these schools have kitchens. You have to make sure they have adequate staff. Like, There is no way to radically transform what is served in schools without spending more money. That's just a fact, and
I think
that is what everyone seems unwilling to discuss.
I think if that were to happen, it would be a true good vibe. So I'm gonna ask us to
There we
stop.
go, there we
I'm gonna
go.
ask you to stop right there. I think that's a good note for us to stop on. Spend more money on your schools because it's good for your kids. I think that's a good message to take away from this. Helena, before we sign off for this episode, why don't you tell us about that fantastic newsletter that you have and how we can find it?
Yeah, if you're into food policy, you can go to foodfix.co and sign up to get on the newsletter. It comes out every Friday. It's free, and if you love it, you can upgrade to a paid subscription.
Another thing you can pay for. There you
Another
go.
thing
That's
you can
good.
pay for. Yeah, I cover all of this stuff and more. So
Well, thank you very much. I always look forward to talking with you and learning all these new things and sometimes old things about food and politics. Thank you so much. I'll see you in a couple of weeks.
thank you. See you soon.